Good afternoon. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. The Supreme Election Board, YSK, published its reasoning for annulling the March 31st mayoral vote in Istanbul. The board's decision rests on the presence of polling committee chairs at 754 ballots who participated in the election and vote count despite not meeting a regulation stating that they must be public officials. The decision also lists irregularities and breaches during the voting and counting processes, which included 706 votes cast by people with no right to vote and 108 ballot boxes that were missing crucial paperwork. And joining us now to comment on the YSK's decision is Levent Köker, who is a professor of public law. Good afternoon, Professor Köker. Welcome once again. What's your overall evaluation of this decision by the YSK? What were your first impressions? It was a very long document, over 200 pages. How do you evaluate it?
Yeah, as a scholar working in the field of public law and political science, it was my expectation since the High Election Board when they made their decision on May 6th, it was my expectation that we would see in the reasoning, in the justification statement of the board, some connections or some causal relations, to be more exact, between what they said in their verdict declared in May 6th and their justificatory statement. In this 250-page document, nearly, I don't see any justification of that decision. Instead, there are some discrepancies, logical inconsistencies, and legally unacceptable way of looking at things and reasoning the whole process.
So up until this point, we've heard numerous ruling party officials making repeated claims about vote theft in the March 31st vote in Istanbul. However, most legal experts have stated that the document that was published by the YSK on Wednesday, its reasoning, does not seem to contain any references to vote theft. Or does it? What's your evaluation and opinion? Does the YSK's decision, in fact, match these vote theft claims?
Okay, let me be clear. On May 6th, when the High Election Board or Council declared their verdict to annul or cancel the mayoral elections in Istanbul, they mentioned that some local electoral boards have been unlawfully formed. So unlawful formation of some local electoral boards was their first reason to annul the elections. But knowing the fact that this fact is not cannot be a reason by itself to annul the elections, the High Election Board said that this unlawful formation of some local electoral boards made an impact on the counting, listing, and documenting the final outcome of votes cast in the local ballot boxes controlled by these local electoral bodies. So when they declared their justificatory statement some 2 days ago, it was our expectation, it was my expectation, that there would be some reasoning that would connect the unlawful formation of local election boards on the one hand and the legal documentation or the process of forming the electoral results of local ballot boxes in a way that we would see a causal relationship between the unlawful formation of local election bodies and the results. This we couldn't see in the justificatory statement of the board.
And Professor, how should we make sense of this reasoning in terms of Turkey's, the history of Turkey's democratic traditions and its institutions? How do you make sense of it?
Well, before going into that, may I clarify what I didn't see?
Please.
By giving you some numbers? The high election board, in the justificatory statement telling us about the reasoning of their decision-making process, they say that there are 754 unlawfully formed local electoral boards in the mayoral elections in Istanbul. And there are 180 ballot boxes with either no documentation or defective documentation of the results, and 105 ballot boxes in which people who shouldn't vote legally, who are restricted or deprived of their voting rights, have voted. But when we want to go into a deeper analysis and trying to establish a connection between these problematic ballot boxes in a local level and the election results, we don't see any connection. For instance, there are 108 ballot boxes with issues about documentations, with defective documentations, really. But only 2 out of 754 unlawfully formed election boards are responsible for those defective documents. So this is a clear sign that there is no connection between the unlawful formation of the local election boards and the vote counting and documentation or defective counting process in certain ballot boxes that might affect the overall result in which CHP candidate won the elections. And this is a sign for me that YSK's decision, like some other decisions this council made in 2017 and 2018 elections, especially in 2017 referendum process and the other elections in the last years, I must say that YSK is in a process that is impacted by the government in power. So those who are in power, those who hold the power in the parliament and the executive, they have an impact on the decision-making process of YSK by controlling the whole judicial process. So this is a sign of a loss of judicial independence, and this has a significant impact on Turkey's free and fair election process that has been going on since 1950 under the Republican era.
Mm-hmm. Professor Köker, thank you very much for being with us today and for your comments.
Of course.
This week, we were joined by Professor Levent Köker, who evaluated the Supreme Election Board's reasoning for annulling the March 31st mayoral vote in Istanbul. And now we'll continue with our next news video. Ekrem İmamoğlu, the main opposition's candidate for the municipal election rerun in Istanbul, launched his campaign on Wednesday.
İmamoğlu from the Republican People's Party, CHP, had claimed victory in the mayor's race for Turkey's largest city and economic hub during the March 31st elections, but his mayoral certificate was revoked by the Supreme Election Council on May 6th. İmamoğlu kicked off his new mayoral campaign at a meeting on Tuesday, where he blamed the ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, for having wasted the resources of the city. "We will end this waste system, which only benefits a tiny minority," he said. The metropolitan municipality's debt between 2014 and 2019 increased 4.5 times from 6 billion Turkish liras to 27.5 billion liras, according to the Court of Accounts, said İmamoğlu. Meanwhile, the municipality's budget deficit grew 20-fold in 5 years, from 216 million to 4 billion liras. 80 million liras were spent for the website of the municipality, said İmamoğlu, arguing all of the country's municipalities' websites could be set up with this amount of money. He also claimed 266 million liras were earmarked for projects and ideas that were never materialized. "We will definitely change this waste and plunder system," said İmamoğlu, adding that during the course of the 18 days when he worked as mayor, he succeeded to say stop to the waste system. "We changed the course of the water and started to channel the resources towards the citizens," he said. During his 18-day tenure, İmamoğlu introduced a proposal to decrease the water prices, under which each citizen living in Istanbul will save 540 liras annually.
Defense Minister Hulusi Akar has said Turkey is preparing for potential US sanctions over its purchase of Russian S-400 missile defense systems. Meanwhile, a CNBC report on Tuesday said Washington has given Turkey just over 2 weeks to scrap the Russian deal or face US sanctions.
Turkey is preparing for US sanctions after going ahead with the purchase of Russian military hardware, Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said in a statement circulated Wednesday. The White House has threatened sanctions under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, also known as CAATSA, which prohibits business activities with Russia's intelligence and defense industry. The United States is hoping to pressure Turkey, its NATO ally, into buying its Patriot missile battery system. However, the Turkish government has refused to back out of purchasing Russia's S-400 missile system, Akar told the media. We've sent personnel to Russia for S-400 training that will begin in the coming days and will span for the following months, Akar said. In response to US pressure, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Wednesday that Russia and Turkey consider such ultimatums unacceptable. In another bold move, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said last week that Turkey and Russia would develop Moscow's next-generation missile defense system, the S-500s. There is absolutely no question of Turkey taking a step back from the S-400's purchase. That is a done deal, Erdogan said at the time. There will be joint production of the S-500s after the S-400s. US officials told Turkey earlier this year to scrap the S-400 deal, saying the missile defense system would not be compatible with its current arsenal of American military hardware. The White House also voiced concerns that the S-400 would compromise its F-35 fighter jets, calling Turkey's plan to buy into the Russian-built system deeply problematic. Last month, the US halted deliveries of F-35 related equipment, citing the Turkish government's refusal to back down on the acquisition of Russian military hardware.
Gönül Tol from the Middle East Institute commented on the rising tension between Turkey and the US on this week's episode of Transatlantic with Ömer Taşpınar and Levent Köker.
In his statement, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar has said something along these lines. We're preparing for US sanctions, but at the same time, there is a softening of tone in the negotiations we're having with the US regarding the S-400 deal with Russia. Yet, I don't see a possibility for the US to soften their tone, because the Americans are very clear. Here, we have always talked about the difficulty of finding a middle ground. The Turkish side couldn't really grasp this. They tried investing in President Trump. For instance, when Finance Minister Berat Albayrak visited Washington, he had to go through a security search before entering the Congress, and this angered him. The reason for his anger was the assumption that he had been in a photo with Trump in the White House, that Trump attached importance to this, and that nothing else mattered. I have always talked about how inconvenient this attitude is. As a matter of fact, the Congress plays an important role in all of this. It's an important actor in the sale of defense systems like the F-35s, and also in imposing sanctions. These are two important foreign policy instruments of the Congress. It's very determined about using both instruments against Turkey, and it seems like it has also convinced the White House. I couldn't really make sense of Hulusi Akar's remarks on how they were making progress with the negotiations. The Turkish side is also partly worried. They're making an effort to involve the Congress in this. At this point, their efforts are directed towards carrying out negotiations through backdoor channels rather than the diplomatic channels that are closer to the Turkish government. They want to involve the Congress, but of course, it's too late for that now. It's very important that the Congress has given them a 2-week notice. Prior to this point, the dominant approach was not to create any tensions with Turkey before the elections. But the notice they have given before the June 23rd Istanbul elections is only until the end of the first week of June. What's being said here is this. You have to make a prompt decision. You either buy the S-400s or the F-35s. If you don't make this decision until the end of June, sanctions will be underway. You will be removed from the F-35 program, and the 100 F-35s that were promised to you will not be delivered. Well, unfortunately, these are very serious developments, and it seems as if Turkey has come to this realization only now. And of course, all of this has an economic aspect as well.
Turkey celebrated the commemoration of Atatürk and Youth and Sports Day on May 19th, marking the centenary of the starting point of the Turkish War of Independence and the emergence of modern Turkey.
On May 19, 1919, Mustafa Kemal, a general in the Ottoman army, later to become the founder of the Republic of Turkey, arrived in the Black Sea province of Samsun from then capital Istanbul to organize the war that saw the remnants of the Ottoman Empire transform into modern Turkey 4 years later. The day was dedicated to the youth of the Turkish nation as Youth and Sports Day, a national holiday that sees young people stage sporting and cultural activities and official ceremonies organized across the nation. The focal point of the celebrations was Samsun, where a total of 182 students from Turkey and other countries traveled to on a 3-day journey aboard the Piri Reis University training ship to retrace Atatürk's route from that historical day. Today, as was the case yesterday, it is you that will protect this country against the circles of treason and evil that target our freedom and independence, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said in his address in Samsun. The celebrations were also attended by the chairman of the main opposition Republican People's Party, Nationalist Movement Party, Felicity Party, Great Unity Party, Democratic Left Party, and Motherland Party. Meral Akşener, the chairwoman of the Good Party, refused to join the celebrations, stating that the meeting was not a state ceremony, but rather a show staged by the ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP. The pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, on the other hand, were not invited to the celebrations.
Edgar Schar interviewed political science professor Jan Werner Müller, who commented on the Supreme Election Board's decision to rerun the mayoral vote in Istanbul.
I think this points to a pattern that we don't always see. I'm not saying it's a total regularity, but we see it quite often. And I think it's maybe important to elaborate on why we see it. Namely, precisely this tendency to contest election outcomes, to claim there's been voter fraud, and so on. It doesn't always happen. I mean, there have been populist parties which have conceded defeat. But why does it happen so often? Well, these parties, on one level, suggest that only they represent what they often call the real people or the silent majority. If you follow that logic, if the majority can express itself, by definition, they always win. So if they lose, there has to be something else going on. And very often, in one way or another, these parties will then suggest that actually at issue is not the silent majority, but a silenced majority. So somebody behind the scenes must have been manipulating things to prevent the majority from truly expressing itself. And this, I think, is a worrying tendency, because even if eventually they do concede defeat, of course they communicate to their followers that the institutions can't be trusted. They communicate various forms of conspiracy theory. There's always, somebody behind the scenes manipulating things. And I think it's important for other actors to kind of underline very clearly that, of course, any of us can criticize, let's say, our election system or how campaign finance works. There's plenty to criticize in many countries. But there's a difference between somebody who makes these criticisms with ultimately empirically verifiable claims. Is there or is there not voter suppression in parts of the United States, for instance, as opposed to populists who, at least on occasion, end up saying something like, our system is rigged and rotten because I didn't win. That is not a democratic claim. And I think it might be helpful if others sort of pushed back against these sorts of claims as often as possible.
Mm-hmm. Russia's CSKA Moscow won the 8th EuroLeague basketball title after beating Turkey's Anadolu Efes 91-83 in the final on Sunday.
In the EuroLeague Final Four being held in the Spanish city of Vitoria-Gasteiz, the Russian club CSKA Moscow became Turkish Airlines EuroLeague champion. This was Anadolu Efes's first EuroLeague final in its history. In Europe's premier club basketball competition final, Russia's Will Clyburn and Corey Higgins scored 20 points each, while Anadolu Efes's Shane Larkin was the top scorer of the match with 29 points. Meanwhile, Real Madrid beat Fenerbahçe Beko 94-75 in the third-place game of the Turkish Airlines EuroLeague Basketball Final Four tournament on Sunday. The leader of the regular season, Fenerbahçe, was defeated by reigning champs Real Madrid and took the fourth place. On Friday, for the first time in its history, two Turkish clubs met in a Turkish Airlines EuroLeague Final Four match, which saw Anadolu Efes beat Fenerbahçe Beko 92-73 to advance to the final. This year is the first time ever that two Turkish clubs have advanced to the Final Four, making Turkey the fifth country to accomplish the feat since 1988, after Spain, Italy, Greece, and Russia.
Galatasaray won the Turkish Super League title for the second season in a row on Sunday after defeating Başakşehir at home.
Defending Turkish champion Galatasaray won the Turkish Super League title for the second season in a row on Sunday after defeating second place Başakşehir 2-1 at home with one game to play before the season ends. Başakşehir made a better start to the game when Rijat Bajic scored in the 20th minute, but Galatasaray scored twice in the second half, with Sofiane Feguli and Henry Onyekuru's goals helping the club secure its 22nd title. Galatasaray also secured a place in the Champions League group stage for the next season. The league title game came 3 days after Galatasaray clinched the Turkish Cup, making Fatih Terim the coach with the most League Cup doubles. This is a well-deserved title, Terim said after the game. The club community, all the Galatasaray fans across the world, we have overcome crises and chaos. Galatasaray supporters poured to the streets across the country to celebrate the title, with the biggest celebrations being held in Istanbul's Taksim Square.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 5 p.m. Goodbye.